Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a nice evening and were able to see some of the lanterns or the river festival where there were the flowers floating down. It was actually beautiful. So I hope you all had a nice evening. I know some of you had a very nice evening, uh, including me. So we're going to get started this morning. We have 5 presentations on data disaggregation and inclusive data, and we'll do a little bit the same manner as we did yesterday. We'll do 2 presentations, then questions, 2 presentations, questions, and then the final presentation. I'm a stickler for time, so you all know you have between 7 and 9 minutes. So presenters, I will warn you when you have 2 minutes left, so that we can keep to the schedule and make sure that everybody has sufficient time to do their presentation. So with that, we will begin with our first presentation. And I'd like to invite Felix Schmeiding on behalf of the expert group on refugee, IDP, and stateless statistics, and he's going to do a presentation on enabling statistical inclusion of refugees and IDPs, developing new guidance, and investing in capacity development.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Can you see the presentation? Yes. So I was supposed to jointly deliver this presentation this morning with Natalia, who's the head of the EGRA Secretariat. Unfortunately, she was unable to travel. So I have the pleasure of getting all the screen time, and you'll have to put up with me for all of my 7 or so slides. If we can move to the next slide, thank you. Great. So I don't need to remind anyone in this room that the Leave No One Behind principle is, of course, the Agenda 2030's core promise. And I think it's been made abundantly clear that forcibly displaced people, of which we now have more than 100 million worldwide, are among those that are at a risk of being left the furthest behind. Now, to make sure that refugees and internally displaced people are not invisible in the data that we produce in the SDG indicator data, there is, of course, the important point of making sure we know how many there are. And that's why we have an SDG indicator on the number or the proportion of the population who are refugees. But perhaps equally important is to know how the living conditions of these populations are. And that's why we also need to talk about disaggregating the broader socioeconomic indicator set, the broader SDG indicator set, by forced displacement status. And I think that's a discussion we've been having in the past, and including through the 2019 report that this IAEG has submitted to the UN Stats Commission, where it recommended 12 priority SDG indicators that are of particular relevance to forcibly displaced populations and which should be disaggregated by forced displacement status. And I'm just relisting there, I'm not going to read through them. And I would perhaps add that this sort of collecting this data and disaggregating these indicators is even more pressing and pertinent as we see that forced displacement situations are becoming more and more protracted. I think we now have a situation where about 80% of the world's refugees live in protracted situations. So we're dealing with people who don't just stay for short periods of time, but who stay for 5 or 10 years or generations. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk about disaggregation, it always sounds a bit like we have that data, we just need to analyze it in better ways. But actually, when we talk about refugees and internally displaced people, it's actually not that easy. And I quite liked how this session was framed as disaggregation and inclusion, because I think that's the key point here. Because when we talk about disaggregating these indicators by forced displacement status, more often than not, it's not that we have that data. And it's not that we just lack better data analysis, but actually what we lack is inclusion, or sometimes identification. So when I say lack of inclusion, I mean that in many countries, refugee and IDP camps, when they live in camps or sites or settlements, those are simply sort of crossed off the map out of the sampling frames of major national surveys and other national data production. When we talk about some countries in MENA and in the Americas, we actually see that there's already a good sizable number of Syrians and Venezuelans displaced abroad covered in national data collection, but sometimes we don't have proper identification. So we're left with proxy indicators, but we're not necessarily able to differentiate between a Venezuelan or a Syrian who came to the country 30 years ago as a business person and someone who was actually forced to flee. So I think inclusion and identification, or better inclusion and better identification, is really perhaps a more fitting term than better disaggregation. But of course, what we want this all to lead to is disaggregation. And the good news is that we really see growing momentum for better inclusion and for better identification of forcibly displaced in national data production. And I'm just putting two examples here. For example, in the Central African Republic, where we're seeing the National Living Conditions Survey allocating a dedicated sample to IDP settlements so that we can produce disaggregated results for this vulnerable population group. And as I said, this is just one example, but I could equally tell success stories of refugees being included in national poverty and living condition surveys in Chad, in Niger, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, and other countries. Likewise about IDPs. I could tell a story about inclusion of refugees in the DHS in Uganda, which is a great success. Another part of that story, of course, is inclusion in national population censuses, where equally there is really some very recent momentum and recent success stories, including from Kenya. I just had a conversation yesterday with a colleague from Rwanda, which I think equally has a success story to tell on that part of the inclusion agenda. Next slide, please. But of course, inclusion of forcibly displaced peoples in national data production is challenging, both on the technical side, but also it requires resources and it requires investments. Thanks. And the expert group on refugee and IDP and statelessness statistics is there to help with that. So just for those who are not familiar with the EGRIS was established in 2016 by the UN Stats Commission. It's one of the expert groups under the UN Stats Commission. We currently have 54 country members and 34 regional or international organizations. And we've sort of gone through different phases of the mandate, or different phases of TORs, if you like, with the expert group. And during the first two phases, the focus was squarely on developing international recommendations. If we could move to the next slide, please. So in 2018, the UN Stats Commission, as you will all likely remember, endorsed the international recommendations on refugee statistics. 2 years later, it endorsed the international recommendations on IDP statistics. And the expert group is now working on a third set of international recommendations. And that sort of is all about statistical frameworks, harmonizing classifications, looking at how data sources can be improved and so on. But it was very much focused on that sort of the theoretical or the abstract or the standard side, the normative side of things, if you like. And now in this third phase of EGRIS, we're moving more to the applied guidance, to the capacity building, and putting much more focus on that. If we could move to the next slide, please. So as part of that, we're completely sort of revamping something that we call the compiler's manual, which tries to take the sometimes more abstract and theoretical and normative pieces of the international recommendations and turn them into something that is applicable in the day-to-day work of national statistical offices, of national data producers in the national statistics systems. Next slide, please. We're also developing an e-learning tool, which is about to be launched very shortly. We've done quite a lot of regional workshops, which several of you have attended. And there's also direct support from EGRIS to various NSOs on the basis of support requests received. So just to sum it up, inclusion of refugees and internally displaced people in in national data production is crucial to deliver to the promise of the Agenda 2030, and to make sure that we leave no one behind and we let no one be invisible in the SDG indicators. And we realize this is not easy, and we realize this is an additional challenge for national statistical systems, but we're also there and we stand ready to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. I think it's very important work, and making the statistically invisible visible is very important, as well as making sure when we have that data, it is not weaponized against those very people. So thank you very much for that. Our next presentation is by Sarah Duerto Valero from UN Women. And Sarah, if I can ask you to come up to the podium, she'll do gender and environment data analysis.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about the Gender and Environment Data Alliance, for those of you who don't know about it, and some of the related efforts to mainstream gender across environment statistics. So, but first, before jumping into this, let me just quickly address why is a gender angle important in environment statistics. When we talk with national disaster management agencies, ministries of environment, sometimes we encounter that this is not the type of analysis that these ministries tend to think about, but we still think it's important to kind of like mainstream gender. Next, please. So there's a number of issues that obviously disasters, climate change, environmental hazards affect both men and women. They affect also the environment, but they sometimes affect differently. So for instance, when a disaster strikes, it might affect more men than women or more women than men if it hits, for instance, an industrial area where it's mostly men working, right? So we see some gender differentials, for instance, in deaths and injuries. When it comes to displacement, if families and households split up for displacement settings, typically women take the children with them, and therefore they have that additional burden to deal with. In the context of coping with disasters and climate change, for instance, we know that women are less likely to own land and other productive assets, and therefore they have less assets to ask for loans, for instance, if they need some. We also know that when it comes to different climate change and disasters, affect the way in which people use their time. So they increase substantially unpaid and domestic work burdens. And although we see that men tend to step up with the care work responsibilities, the domestic work responsibilities still remain with women. Additionally, we see differentials in participation in environmental decision-making bodies like, forest committees and water management bodies, etc. And we see gender-differentiated roles in environmental conservation and degradation very much related to people's jobs. Next, please. So really, are the existing indicators that we have enough to measure all these dimensions? Next, please. We have many international frameworks, from the SDG indicators to the Sendai framework, the global set of climate change indicators, the global biodiversity framework, etc. Gender is kind of sprinkled around some of this to a certain extent, but it's not consistently mainstreamed, and therefore there's a lot of issues that are still outside of this framework. So here in the Asia Pacific region, we had several consultations to kind of ask member states if they thought that this was relevant to them, and they came back to us with many gap areas that they would like indicators on, and currently we don't have indicators at the international level. Next. So this is, for instance, a graph that shows the SDGs, where the gender-specific indicators are located. As you can see, goals 6 and 7 on water and energy have no gender-related indicators. Goals 12, 14, 15. So a lot of these environment-related goals don't really have gender-related indicators. And many countries, at least, maybe globally will differ by region. In the Asia-Pacific region, and we know in the Africa region as well, many countries have national development strategies that actually capture this gender-environment nexus, but they don't have a way to monitor whether their commitments are being implemented. Next, please. So how can JEDA help with this? So JEDA is the Gender and Environment Data Alliance. The conveners of the Alliance are listed on the slide. I'm not going to read them all, but the Alliance is chaired by IUCN and WIDO. I coordinated with our colleagues in IUCN and WIDO to put together this presentation. The Alliance meets quarterly, and it's currently developing a criteria for adding additional members. We have had lots of requests from many different peoples to join the Alliance. So we're trying to see, who becomes a permanent member versus just, part of the extended network. Next, please. So what does the Alliance do? There are four main goals. The first one is to collate existing data and research. So really the Alliance is not looking at producing new data, but rather just gathering the data that's there to amplify and communicate the gender and environment nexus and the need to produce disaggregated data, intersectional data, et cetera, in the context of environment. The Alliance is also looking to strengthen capacity of national statistics offices and other data producers to really generate some of this disaggregated data in the context of environment. And finally, it looks to influence norms for data generation in this regard. How to do this is still a little bit under discussion. The Alliance is fairly new, but there is conversation about supporting a cohort of up to 6 international fellows that can enhance collation work and synthesize all the data that's already out there in this context, as well as providing small grants to support feminist participatory action and research. Next, please. But besides that, all the different members of the Alliance are actually working to enhance the availability of gender and environment statistics. So different members are working on different things. We recently heard from UNFPA, for instance. They are preparing maps utilizing geospatial information that show exposure to disasters by men and women across the world, and they are publishing these maps very soon. In the case of UN Women, I'll walk you through some of the work that we're doing on gender and environment, just for your information. So the first thing that we're doing is we design a model questionnaire on gender and environment statistics. For gender and environment surveys. So we support National Statistics Office that want to collect data in this regard. The questionnaire includes 10 modules on many different topics. So anywhere from climate change and disasters to engagement in environment-related livelihoods, for instance, or ownership of environmental assets, etc. It's been pilot tested in disaster-prone areas in Bangladesh, and now national representative surveys are underway. So already completed in Mongolia and Tonga, currently underway in Samoa, and scheduled for Kiribati and Vietnam very soon. Many other countries have expressed interest, not just in Asia and the Pacific, but also in other regions like Colombia, Kyrgyzstan, etc. So in 2023, we are going to be supporting many countries with the implementation of the surveys. The surveys are able to generate about 100 indicators on this topic, so really helping to fill some of these data gaps. Next, please. In addition, we always kind of encourage, and this reminds me a bit of the discussion that we had this morning on the Intersecretariat Working Group, we encourage countries to use some of the data that's already available. So we are integrating geospatial information with demographic and health survey data. And it's very helpful to see how some climate change related variables affect gender related outcomes. So things like drought episodes, frequency and severity of floods, aridity index, etc., affect things like child marriage, adolescent births, intimate partner violence, etc. So what you see there in the map is just a map of Timor-Leste. It shows how it is in the arid clusters, so the light blue clusters, that the highest prevalence of intimate partner violence takes place, which are the yellow dots. So it's a clear correlation. Next slide. So when you actually do this similar analysis, but for other countries, you see that indeed. For the first graph shows child marriage is higher in all the arid clusters. The second graph shows that adolescent birth rate is higher in all the arid clusters as well. So there is a bit of a pattern. Next. And finally, the last bit of work that we can do also to try to fill data gaps is to look at the administrative data that's already there. So this is a graph of a joint effort that we did with SPC, reaching out to Pacific Power utility firms to see how many women make part of their staff and how many of them are managers versus technical positions, and look at their lack of influence in related decision making. I think that's it. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think the gender angle in environment statistics is really interesting, and that nexus between them is an important lens. So thank you very much for that. We're going to open the floor to questions now for both Sarah and Felix. So please signal if you would like to ask a question or have any comments. UNICEF, please go ahead.
Thank you for the great presentations. It's not really a question, but maybe just more of a comment. I think it was mentioned by Felix earlier on, what is our guideline and what is the minimum requirement? And it seems that sometimes it's context specific, but I think it would be good for us to think about that a little bit. As UNICEF, when we do try to create global databases and as custodians of different indicators, we look at various surveys to decide whether we include it or we don't include it. And one of the questions that comes up, for example, is, well, if a country did a survey and didn't include a refugee population or a non-resident population, a resident population, but non-citizens are excluded from surveys, sort of the question we always ask ourselves is, well, do we include it or not? And we don't really want to make the decisions by indicator, and we would prefer that there was some guidance coming to say for the SDGs, what is that acceptable level of representativeness? And if it varies by context, what that would be. So I just pose that as a question. I had a question on the gender and environment presentation on Timor-Leste. So I used to live there for a year. And so you made the association between the arid area and lots of other statistics. And I just want to make sure, and this is not just for gender, but in all the work we do, sometimes I get a little confused because there's association and there's causation. And I want to be careful because when we start talking about the SDGs and start putting together all these different indicators, it's sometimes not clear because there are associations, but it doesn't mean that if climate change continues and it gets hotter and drier in areas, are we going to see an increase in these statistics? And so I just want to be careful about it. It's just sort of a comment, but just for us to sort of think about when we are looking at different associations, what is the message that we're trying to convey there? Thanks.
Okay, I see no other flags, so if you want to respond.
Just quickly, I agree with you on the association. I mean, indeed, all we see is an association. In the case of Timor-Leste, but we know normally when we identify this, what we do is we follow up with national governments to see if that kind of makes sense and if it's not a surprise to them and something they already saw. So in the case of Timor-Leste, for instance, after discussions with the government, we saw that it's likely an issue of aridity triggering decrease in agricultural yields, therefore poverty, therefore child marriage, right? So it's a little bit, obviously it's a multiplicity of factors. We just see the association there, but like you said, we can't tell that, if the trend continues, then child marriage is going to worsen, right? Like ultimately it's a matter of like a compound of variables. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your comment on the acceptable levels of representativeness and inclusiveness, if you like. And the exclusion of certain subpopulations. I mean, I fully agree with you, and you would know what my personal opinion on the matter is, but sort of looking more at the normative basis, I think for population censuses, it's a lot easier because the statement of the target population for population censuses is quite clear. And it's, at least at a normative level, it's quite clear that refugees living in a country for longer terms, internally displaced people and so on should be included. So in censuses, it's more a question of identification. But when it comes to surveys, the normative basis is much less explicit, it's much less clear. So it really depends on sort of what the use case is when governments think about should we include, should we exclude. And I think I briefly referred to that example of Uganda, which for me is a fantastic success story. And, huge congratulations to you, boss, and the government of Uganda for that. They're currently undertaking the 7th round of the DHS, and all previous 6 rounds excluded the refugee settlements in the country. And this is a very sizable population. This is one of the largest refugee populations in the world. And the government of Uganda is very generously accepting these refugee populations and is very generously offering some of its services, health services, education services, other services to this population. So not having refugees included in the DHS is a huge blind spot, of course, for knowing your user base of these national services. And I think, in that sense, the answer and the way forward is absolutely clear in my mind, that you can only benefit from including these forcibly displaced populations in your national surveys. Thank you.
I believe Oman had a question. Please go ahead.
I have a question for the first presentation. Is a temporary movement of people due to weather conditions considered as IDPs? Because the government prepare buildings such as schools, for example, for people until the weather is over, and then they return to their homes. So this is my question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Will we take more? Thank you so much for the excellent question. For internally displaced people, the international definition is quite clear. It includes disaster displacement. So there's a standing committee that sort of defines what an IDP is, and it includes disaster displacement. Of course, when we're talking about more short-term displacement and it comes to data collection, then of course there's a bit of a, it becomes a bit more granular in terms of sort of emergency-focused ad hoc data collection exercise versus inclusion in more sort of regular national data production like the big national surveys. So I guess there is a bit of a more nuanced story to tell in that situation, but we're happy to have a bilateral follow-up conversation on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands or flags. So thank you very much, Sarah and Felix. And we'll go to our next presentation, citizen-generated data, Ling Feng Nguyen, Management and Sustainable Development Institute, Leave No One Behind Partnership. If you could come up to the podium, please.
Okay, thanks to Chase. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you so much for inviting me to a very important event today to share about the citizen-generated data. I'm today representing the Leave No One Behind Partnership with the mission of making the voice of community heard and count in SDG implementation. I also represent Leave No One Behind Vietnam and my organization, Management and Sustainable Development Institute, MSD Vietnam. Yes, let me have a quick introduction of Leave No One Behind Partnership. We are a global coalition founded in 2017 and bring together ICSO and international think tanks, and we have currently has coalition in Kenya, Nepal, Malawi, Denmark, and my country, Vietnam. Citizen-generated data is one of our key tasks to ensure the voice of communities, especially the vulnerable groups, heard and count. We always apply a meaningful combination of qualitative and quantitative approach with step of making the research friendly with the communities. Same mission with the Leave No One Behind coalition. Next, please. And next. Yeah, next, please. And same missions with the Leave No One Behind coalition. Leave No One Behind Vietnam, my national partnership was established in 2018 to ensure people voice heard and count. And next slide, please. In 2022 and 23, our focus is to promote citizen-generated data in Vietnam. So I have the opportunity today to share about our experience in citizen-generated data in Vietnam. So I will go to the main part of my presentation today. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, thank you. Thanks to other speakers, I think I do not have to talk about Leave No One Behind and the data system. My presentation is just to look through some different aspects of collecting and using data in Vietnam in particular, and data in SDG in general, in the lens of a CSO, a lead of Leave No One Behind partnership. We all talk about data in SDG as high quality, trustworthy data from strong national statistical system are needed to inform evidence-based decision making and measure the process towards achieving sustainable development. The view of UN has translated effectively to the viewpoint and approach of data system in Vietnam. The data in SDG is for the effective decision-making process in Vietnam to ensure the SDG process will achieve the SDG and no one is left behind. To this approach, as our observation, there was a significant change, the shift from collecting official data to participative data in Vietnam from 2017 to now. I just want to give an example here when in 2017 and 18, when Vietnam do the first voluntary national review in 2018, the official data, which mean the data from the government agency and UN system will be collected. The consultations were only conducted when some draft of the report developed. The other data, for example, the NGO or institute's data and research would consider as non-official data, which is the data not represent statistics certificate or published as officially by the National Statistics Office. With this type of non-official data, we found different ways to share and submit to the drafting team of the Vienna report. But then the drafting team collect through the official channels, like some kind of representing organization. But I believe that then the process of identifying which kind of data changed a lot in 2019 and 20, when CSO were invited to the process of report development of Vienna of the country reports at the beginning. Nearly 80% of our recommendations from Leave No One Behind Vietnam were integrated into the 2020 national report on the SDG implementation in Vietnam. So I believe that this is shift from the kind of official data to participative data. And we are really looking forward to the next shift one more time to the inclusive data process. Then next slide, I would like to talk about the citizen-generated data. As a definition, citizen-generated data produced by non-state actors, particularly individuals or civil society organizations, under the active consent of the data providing subject. Primary purpose of citizen-generated data is to contribute to monitoring, demand, or drive change on issues affecting citizens or their communities. And citizen-generated data is useful complement to institutional data, not a replacement for it. It can highlight issues that are important to people and fit their view up into the higher level policy debate. It will close the data gaps, strengthen engagement with data user, and enhance trust in data. Next slide, please. To process the citizen-generated data in Vietnam, we also do a kind of pilot survey to collect opinion of target groups, including youth, women, people with disability, children, LGBT, and CSO, about the status and results of implementation of SDG in Vietnam, especially at the community level. And we have a 2,000 sample with a different methodology of survey group, to make the surveys very friendly with a different group, especially also understandable by people with disability, ethnic minority, and also children. So after the process, I would like to move to some thinking about the data in SDG in Vietnam in our lens. I think I will tap into some challenge and gap that the data in SDG in Vietnam in particular to fill the SDG data gap in different countries in general. First, I think the national system will meet with many challenges to collect data voice from different and vulnerable groups. So it's very important to join efforts and commitment to grassroots level organization. So that's to collect voice in a friendly way. It's not only the process of collecting data, but the process of empowering. Second, data as number of data or as evidence for decision-making process. I think that we talk about the leave no one behind. But what does it mean? If when the data only shows a small number, whether it's small number of people, for example, like small number of children don't have a birth certificate, will attract the public audience to the issue. And so that we need a story and case from vulnerable group to ensure that those small number of demand not be met. We still need to consider ensure that no one left behind. And I also think that it's significant to develop difficult, very important to find things away to ensure the citizen-generated data will go with the official data. And SDG can draw the comprehensive picture of SDG achievement in country, not only the achievement of each SDG, but also the promote the comprehensive sustainable development. So representing Leave No One Behind partnership, I would like to go to some kind of final request in promoting citizen-generated data. We appeal to NSO and civil society actors to engage in dialogue with the goal of improving national SDG monitoring and review. We believe that dialogues on equal footing are important to build trust on both sides and establish a basis for a technical collaboration around CGD. Also, we ask NSO to engage in technical partnership with CSO, aiming to elaborate joint framework for the generation and use of citizen-generated data in the country. This will provide a solid basis for joint data project. And also, we ask government to ensure that future VNR will only include a chapter dedicated to managed black group in the country. Eventually, we appeal to government to ensure that the planning of public policy, service, and budget also refer to CGD and other inclusive evidence. And to rely on this, both civil society and NSO we need to build capacity in order to bring better data, making best use of it for successful SDG implementation. And finally, we ask government and international donors to invest into strategic data capacity building of both NSO and civil society, helping to foster their successful collaboration for SDG process that leave no one behind. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I think this presentation is very timely in view of the expert group meeting starting tomorrow on citizen generated data. So thank you very much. Our next presentation is data disaggregation for SDG monitoring in Malaysia. Nazaria Barhudin from the Malaysia Department of Statistics. If you could come to the podium, please.
A very good morning to all. I will be sharing on data disaggregation for SDG monitoring in Malaysia. And the outline of my presentation is as follows, and will cover 6 topics. Okay, next slide, please. These are the activities undertaken in Malaysia in implementing the SDG. And thus far, DOSM has, Department of Statistics Malaysia has undertaken many engagement, and to date we have engaged with over 36 agencies as well as users of SDGs. And our engagement session with agencies started since 2015 until 2017. And with the engagement, we are able to assess the availability of SDG indicators. And as a result, we published the initial assessment of SDG report in 2018. And the engagement session continues for the SDG indicators data collection as well as the SDG indicators development. From the engagement session that we have undertake, we managed to publish annual SDG indicators report starting from 2018, and the latest one is 2021, will be published in the very near future. Okay, besides the assessment, initial assessment of SDG indicators in Malaysia, we have published the SDG reports annually, and with each publication, we have been able to increase the availability of indicators from 99 in 2018 to 128 in 2019, 146 in 2020. And we hope to increase it further this time around 167. And in terms of data disaggregation, we have include 18 district level data and in 2019 and 19 in 2020, and we hope to increase more in the current publication. This is the availability of SDG indicators, by the type of indicators. Almost every goal has achieved more than 50% data availability, except for SDG 6 and SDG 16. And there are 3 goals which has achieved more than 90% of data availability, namely goal 3, 4, and 9. And for this year, we are targeting to publish 169 indicators, 68% of the total at national level, and 20 indicators at administrative level. This is fully supported by the cooperation and coordination from agencies and ministries. Next. In terms of data disaggregation, Malaysia has improved, as I mentioned, from 49 in 2019 to 73 indicators in 2021. And the data disaggregation by geographical location, that is by state, strata, and the district, as well as by sex, age group, and educational level. In terms of dimension of minimum disaggregation, there are 34 dimensions of minimum disaggregation listed by UNSD in IAEG-SDG website. And there are 184 indicators listed in the 34 dimensions. Out of the 184 indicators with disaggregation, Malaysia has fulfilled 39 or 21%. Then among the list of disaggregation geography, as I mentioned, is the state, strata, and district, and then sex, age, framework, grade, agreement, and climate change curricula. For sex dimension, Malaysia has achieved 44% and 11% for each dimension. In terms of data disaggregation, I think for the case of Malaysia, since independence, all the Malaysia plan required to have very detailed data, because we have targets to achieve for specific groups and specific areas. And thus, in terms of our surveys and censuses, that it has been designed to meet that requirement. And this disaggregated data is what are vital in monitoring the policies and programs for the targeted group. On the second item on census and survey, all our routine household survey are expanded to be representative of the demographic variables, and as well as to include the SDG indicators. For instance, for the household income and expenditure survey, we have for goal 1, 6, 7, and 10. And for ICT access and use of households and individuals, we have goal 4, 5, and 17. And labor force survey, we target for goal 4, 5, 8, and 9. And we also have devised a new household survey to enhance our SDG indicators availability. That is the National Household Indicator Survey. And for this survey, we cover 22 SDG indicators, and which include 5 education indicators, 2 civil registration and vital statistics, and 1 gender-related indicators. And then there are the details, so I need not mention. And at the same time, for our economic surveys, we are going to include 10 indicators. And for the agriculture census plan in 2024, we will add 20 further indicators. As for new data sources, the department has used the GIS to develop the indicator 9.1.1. And in terms of workshops, we continue to have our engagement and specific workshops. And based on the current workshops that we have in July 2022, we managed to gain another 13 new SDG indicators. And I would also like to recognize here, we also have technical assistance from FAO to develop the prevalence of moderate or severe food insecurity in the population based on the food insecurity experience scale. And in terms of statistics at the smallest level, I think the next slide will show that we have published 200 parliamentary level subnational statistics as well as 666 state legislative assembly. And we will be having our voting day on the 20th. And I think we are receiving many requests to have these statistics. And the following 3 slides, next slide, is more on the recent work of the department. The first one, what we call Kawasanku, or in translation is my region. These are the statistics that we presented that are close to the people or rakyat in Malaysia based on a GitHub platform. And we repackage some of the data that we have from other platforms or other dashboard that we have into this. And we covered 4 main themes, that is the geography, population, socio-economic and public facilities. And then this one will be further enhanced to include the SDG indicators. The next one is on social economic statistics for small area. The pilot for one small area, smaller than the district, that is Mukim in Bahasa, we undertake in Air Hitam Muar, Johor. And this is a self-updating in terms of basic information of the population on living quarters and population characteristics. And we undertake this project together with the district office as well as the head of villages. And the data that we got from this pilot project is being inputted into our system of the My Population. And now, at this point in time, pilots are being done for one administrative district in every state. The next one, this one is another collaboration that we undertake with Lembaga Zakat or the Zakat Board in the state of Kedah. This is a religious entity that is responsible to collect zakat or in Islamic financial term to collect and redistribute to those in need. So this is a collaboration with DOSM and Lembaga Zakat or the Zakat Board, and we use this platform to update the 2020 census profile and later, all these 3 activities will also include SDG indicators that what we plan for the future. And lastly, moving forward, I think we will continue to improve our disaggregation in terms of SDG indicators to enhance further than 20 that we plan for 2021. And as I mentioned, we will extend to collect more SDG indicators in our economic census as well as our agriculture census. And we are also engaging with other government agencies, that is Urbanis, who is in charge of SDG 11 for cities, as well as local councils, as well as CSOs. They are having their own projects, but we are participating in providing the basic info for the projects, and we are also providing the basic SDG indicators that are available. And we hope to further continue with these collaborations to enhance our SDG indicators availability as well as the disaggregation as needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazaria. It's great to see that there's more data disaggregation for the indicators each year. So that's excellent improvement. I'm going to open the floor to any questions or comments to both Nazaria and to Lynn. So please raise your flag or let me signal to let us know. So we have India first, then Palestine, then Italy.
Thank you, Chair. For SIGGEN generated data, actually it only, as you mentioned, that it only complements the official statistics. So it cannot be considered as a separately as a data source, but it complements the official statistics. So in order to include this data source in official statistics, as country-specific data policy is required. I presume that this is comment only. I presume that not many countries are having such data policies. If available, that can be shared with everyone, then it would be good. So that we can also initiate in this direction. Thank you.
Palestine.
Thanks, Chair. My question regarding citizen-generated data. As we know, during the pandemic, NSOs were asked to and need to provide timely data, specifically in health, education, and economic sectors. And you talk about enhancing trust of data and data as a number of data as evidence for decision maker. So what are the lessons we can learn from your experience, how to ensure trust in data and data quality? Thanks.
Italy.
Okay, thank you. Okay, to the colleague from Vietnam, I think that this process of empowering, given to the fact that you are changing the view on respondents, they are becoming from respondents data donors in few words. In this process, there are civil society organizations. So in your country and in your experience, are these civil society organizations inside the statistical system of your country or not? And what do you think about this, or the role of these private organizations and how they can be included in the system? And to the colleague from Malaysia, I have seen that you have done a lot of investment on GIS usage to break down figures for having detailed information in the SDG frameworks. What about privacy issues? Have you faced with privacy issues, and how have you solved?
Okay, so if you want to take those, we'll do another round after.
Thank you for many questions. And it also proves that your concerns about citizen-generated data. Thank you so much. So the first question relating to the kind of citizen-generated data, whether it's only complement the kind of official data. I think that's it's very important towards inclusive data. So it also includes both official data. And before we call non-official data, but no, it's also a kind of data sources. Very important because data is not only to generate it, to kind of to see the kind of situation, but also the kind of the process for empowering people, and also to make that it kind of inclusive data with all kind of the voice of the people will be heard and count. So relating to the data, to ensure that the data of the citizen also have the quality and accepted by the government. I agree that it's very important that the government also have a kind of data policy to recognize the kind of citizen-generated data and data provided by CSO through empowering the CSO and also the citizen, so that the data will reflect the kind of the adapt with the indicator from the government, but also reflect the voice of the communities. I would like to give an example that's when we conduct the citizen-generated data surveys in Vietnam, there are many kind of the indicators that the government said that we achieved the kind of high level of indicator, so that's we will achieve soon the SDG, but in the views of the people don't think that. So why? Whether the government don't achieve some kinds of the indicator, no, the government achieves some kind of indicator in their views. But in the views of the vulnerable people, they think that's not yet enough. And especially with the managed group, they think that though the government try their best, but the service or their achievement has not reached them. For example, in our SDG report in 2020, 90% of children in Vietnam has birth certificate. So only 1% has not, right? It's maybe a small number, and the government also positively thinks that we will achieve the kind of 100% soon. However, with the view of managed life group, we know that 1%, maybe only 1% of children may never get the birth certificates because of the barrier in the legal document. And also, like in many cases, they could not get the birth certificates with the current legal documents. So if the legal document could not revive, they will be always invisible and could not have the opportunity to access to education, insurance, and all kinds of opportunity, and not certificates as a citizen. So though a small number, so small case, will be reflected by the community. And if the citizen-generated data cannot recognize, so the kind of very small number of cases of children could not get a birth certificate, cannot go to the policy making process. So that's results in the revised in legal document. And so the kind of, it also go to some kind of the other question relating to how the government can ensure that it will be timely, data are collected and respond. So I think, and also the third question relating to the role of CSO, I think yes, CSO will be a very good channel and taking the roles of collecting citizen-generated data, not because the government could not do it, but because we can outreach in a more effective way to the vulnerable groups and also talk in their friendly way and understand the situation, the context, and also the consequence. So that's CSO will play a very important role in the process to ensure that people, no one left behind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Italy, for the question. I think not only for GIS, I think for other data as well. Actually, we are also having requests, especially for agencies, when they are providing us with data, administrative data, they are asking for what would they have in return. So this is something that is very much into our discussion now, how we're going to address this, and especially the privacy issues. So at the moment, we have a microdata policy internally placed in the department, whereby we will not reveal the individual information, be it the company or establishment or the person. And in terms of the maps, we will combine 3 enumeration blocks. We would not provide information up until the single enumeration block. And there are a few rules that we have to follow depending on the surveys and census and the surveys that we are undertaking. And this data sharing has been really an issue that we have need to discuss. Like for instance, in our current population census, we also have 29 agencies sharing the information with us. And now we are having quite a time of like, how are you going to share the information? And then for this, we are going to enhance our microdata policy, as well as the specific projects. We also have certain SOPs put in place in terms of data sharing. And also at this point in time, we are also enhancing our act, and we hope to table it, the new act, by next year. We incorporate the clause on data sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Oh, Speed, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question for Nazaria, but also perhaps for others about how you interpret the leaving no one behind using disaggregated data. We have lots of disaggregated data, and if you look at the absolute change, for example, a higher percentage of poor people came out of poverty in absolute terms. Is that fulfilling the leave no one behind? Or does it have to be in relative terms? But that's very, very difficult for the poorest groups to do? Or is it the percentage of the poor who come from this particular state? And we find, for example, in India, that it did very, very well in the global MPI with 415 million people coming out of poverty. The poorest states, the rural, the children, had the fastest absolute progress. But the percentage of poor people in rural areas increased, but the percentage of poor children decreased. So we have different definitions in the data. And I just wondered if you have looked at that and come up with a consideration of what leaving no one behind means in Malaysia.
Okay, I think in Malaysia, the ultimate goal is like, of course, we are leaving no one behind, the individual itself. But in terms of the data, I think we have to look of what we have now. And actually, we are really moving towards that. Like for the case of Malaysia, we also have registration of the poor. So this is under the one of the government agencies. And now we already developed a system for all the information that we have with regards to those who are receiving assistance from the government. So there are, I think, more than 36 agencies, and the department has compiled the data. And I think, again, the data sharing issues come about, and we have also developed a special an SOP for that. And I think for Malaysia, not only for the the relative terms in terms of portion and whatnot, but we are also looking at the individual itself.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both our presenters. We're running a little bit behind, but so I'm going to cut into your coffee break to make sure that our final presenter gets enough time to both do the presentation and also have some questions and comments. So I would invite Jose Maria Vieira from the International Disability Alliance to the podium, and he will provide a presentation on inclusive data and the SDGs, a focus on disability, data gaps, and solutions.
On. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, colleagues, friends. Let me first acknowledge the organizers for inviting us to speak here once again. We have been in many of those meetings, and we are pleased to see that persons with disabilities remain a top priority for many of you here. If we can go to the first slide, please. I would like to start my presentation by reminding ourselves about the gaps on collecting data for persons with disabilities. But allow me this time to do it a little bit differently. I think we have, or you have heard us saying several times, the gaps that we have around persons with disabilities. For instance, only 2 of the 10 SDGs indicators that supposedly have to disaggregate data about persons with disabilities, 2 are doing it. But I think now we have to be more conscious of the effect of such gaps. So if we just mention what has happened to children with disabilities in the time of COVID, where the lack of data resulted basically in not knowing what the needs were for children with disabilities that have to stay at home, resulting in more exclusion from the education system. If we look at what is happening around the situation in Ukraine, where countries with good faith are receiving refugees with disabilities, but basically because of lack of data, they don't know what the needs of these refugees with disabilities are, and consequently, no plans and programs can be implemented. Or even that so far, we don't know how many people have been displaced in Pakistan as a result of the recent floods, and that is also the effect of not having data. So clearly, we are now seeing more and more that not collecting data is violating human rights and denying the access to basic services to people with disabilities. We have to do this, collecting better data, through different ways. And I would like to propose some ideas because I think we also have to be propositive from the disability community. So if we can go to the next slide. When it comes to organization of persons with disabilities, the first thing to say is that in general, the disability community across the world is organized through organization of persons with disabilities. And I think it's key to understand this if we want to collect more data and better data for persons with disabilities, because we need to work more and more with organization of persons with disabilities. Not because organization of persons with disabilities are source of information, because in many cases, those organizations of persons with disabilities are providing services that sometimes governments have not been able to produce or deliver, or in other cases, government have delegated to this organization of persons with disabilities such services. So it's very common to find organization of persons with disabilities running schools, running rehab centers, running employment programs for persons with disabilities. And that is definitely a good source of information and a good source of data when it comes to planning and programming. So it's key to realize the role that organization of persons with disabilities can play in collecting data, advocating for more data, and even more importantly, to utilize data when it comes to persons with disabilities. If we can go to the next slide, and it's very much connected, my next point, to something that has been said here a few times already this morning, and is the role of citizen data generation. Persons with disabilities through their representative organizations, we are already generating data. I said it just now. When you run a school, when you provide health care services, when you have to pay or fundraise for support services to people with disabilities, definitely there are data that is being generated. So I think in general, not only the experience has proven that citizen-generated data, it's an added value and an extra piece of information, but when it comes to people with disabilities, becomes even more important. Organization of persons with disabilities are already producing data, and we should not be missing that piece of information. If we can go to the next slide, please. If we have so far expressed from our perspective the consequences of the gaps when it comes to data, and we are more understanding the importance of OPDs, I think we need to realize how important it is to partner and develop partnerships with organizations of persons with disabilities. In our experience from the International Disability Alliance, examples like partnering with CBM Global Disability Inclusion and other organizations in producing a toolkit on data and persons with disabilities has already created more capacities among organizations of persons with disabilities to better influence our governments and agencies collecting data. Also, the work that we do with the Washington Group is key to realize that there are out there already very good tools that have been used and proved to be useful when it comes to collection of persons with disabilities. The Washington Group's set of questions are not only a very important tool, but has been expanded, and together with UNICEF have created some specific tools for collecting data on children with disabilities. And once again, it's a result of those partnerships that I was talking about. Lastly, I would like to share with you some reflections around the capacity building that's needed. I have said, organization of persons with disabilities, we can help, we can support. Our mandate is to advocate for more data, but we need to train more national statistic offices. We need to provide more trainings to those enumerators collecting data, and that is only possible if governments and multilateral agencies realize the role that persons with disabilities can play in the data world. Now, in closing, I would like just to share one quick example coming from this region that speaks very much to what I just presented. The Pacific Disability Forum is an organization of 71 organizations of persons with disabilities from 22 countries that back in 2015 decided to start working with Carapest OPDs to create more awareness around data and persons with disabilities. They started by pushing the use of the Washington Group set of questions in different tools for collecting data, And as a result of that, and with the support of the government of Australia, they have managed to expand that work, not only in this particular country, but also in other countries like Samoa, Tuvalu, Tonga, Fiji, etc. In any case, what I have been trying to say here so far is that it's not any longer possible only to acknowledge the gaps around data and persons with disabilities. Daily, we are seeing the effects of that. So if we do not take immediate measures, including realizing the importance of OPDs in this world, we will definitely be missing one of the biggest population when it comes to people, when it comes to the general population. It's important to remind that persons with disabilities are approximately 15%, 1/5 of the world population. If we don't capture that data, we will be missing a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. As you noted, the pandemic as well as the war in Ukraine illustrates the disparity of outcomes or impacts for the disabled population, and so having data for that population is critical. We'll open the floor to questions or comments for Jose. Malaysia?
Just a little comment, like for instance, at the Department of Statistics Malaysia, we try to collect the information on disabilities, especially during census. And we also included some in our labor force survey and also in our some other surveys of household surveys. But what we found is we couldn't get the real population of the people with disabilities. Always the data is less than what we get from the agencies that are registering the disabled persons. So I think it's quite a challenge for us to get the information on the people with disability. Although we're like for our census, we already add the questions by the Washington group, and the result is we still got less than what the numbers that are being registered. So I think this is quite a challenge.
Thank you for the comment. Indeed, we also see how challenging it is to access to relevant data for a person with disabilities. And I would like to add something else. Sometimes what we hear when we speak with different governments is the fact of how challenging it is to find partners in the disability movement to work around data. And it's definitely something that we also need to work on. It's impossible. I mean, just the organization that I represent has presence in 182 countries, and we represent approximately 1,100 organizations of persons with disabilities. And I'm sure there are even more than those 1,100 organizations that we represent. So we understand the challenges of accessing data, partnering with organizations of persons with disabilities, but I think the focus should be put in how do we mainstream disability in our policies, and how do we do, or what do we do in order to reach out to organizations of persons with disabilities and persons with disabilities in general to work more on collecting data for persons with disabilities.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, I see none. Thank you very much, Jose, and thank you to all the presenters for this first session. And we are at 10:30, and I think we'll give 20 minutes for a break, so that would put you back here at 10:50, please. Thank you. Just, we're going to start again. So we're on to item 14, but before we get started, just to let everyone know that yesterday's presentations, as well as the video, are on the website. So you'll be able to see them, and today's presentations, I believe, will be up tomorrow. So we're going to go into item 14, data innovations and initiatives for SDGs, but we're going to make some changes just to see if you're awake. So we're going to actually move up a presentation from this afternoon because our member from Ireland needs to catch a flight. And we're going to move down Howie Chen's presentation on SDG, supporting SDG monitoring and the Intersecretariat Working Group. We're going to move that down to this afternoon. And then on top of it, we're going to change the order this morning. So we're going to begin with Mary. So Mary, I have to find yours now. So we're going to begin with the implementation of the SDGs Geospatial Roadmap by Mary Smith McCarthy from Ireland on behalf of the Working Group on Geospatial Information co-chair. So Mary, to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for facilitating the move of this presentation. And thanks, Daniel, for all your help with the presentations. This presentation is on the Working Group on Geospatial Information's work in implementing the SDG Geospatial Roadmap. The format of this presentation demonstrates some of the GIS tools available. So the format is a story map format. And what the story map allows you to do is visualize maps and infographics and the data, and also provide text and interactive maps to showcase a story or to tell the story of what the data is demonstrating. So the beginning of this story map just looks at a lot of what was presented yesterday in terms of the work on geospatial data and the implementation of the roadmap by the Working Group on Geospatial Information. So here we have a comment or a quote from the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and it emphasizes focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals and reaching Agenda 2030, and a particular focus on leaving no one behind. So what I'm going to do is scroll down to some of the case studies for the countries which are presented in the format of a story map. So everything happens somewhere, and the cornerstone of geography is a sense of place. So that's what the geospatial information tries to do, is present the data in the sense of a place focus. And this is represented digitally in maps. So this map here is an animation of land use change in Bangkok from 2017 up to 2021. So if I just press on the animation here, you can see, I'll just zoom in here because it's a bit far out. So basically you can see the change in color over time. And we successfully did this in Ireland when the SDG infrastructure had been developed for animation maps like this. We were able to turn it around very quickly and present it to the government in terms of COVID-19 changes. So we were able to show hotspots where COVID-19 was developing in regions on a weekly basis, and this was very useful in informing the government of what areas to focus on. So it demonstrated that once you had the infrastructure there for the SDGs, it could be rapidly applied to situations unexpected like the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll move quickly down to some of the case studies from the various countries. So again, the story map allows you to visualize data. Here we have a satellite imagery of Bangkok, and on the left-hand side, you can add text and explain it, and you can also put in comments on the maps so that when you click on the maps, you have an interactive tool. And this is particularly effective in terms of regional areas on a map when you want to showcase data about a particular region. So the roadmap is available in English, French and Spanish, and the working group on geospatial information welcomes offers of translation by member states so that the roadmap can be used and understood by as many countries as possible. So again, we produced the story map in Ireland on our governance story related to SDGs, and we also produced our VNR in a story map format. And again, we will be doing this for the next VNR. Also, Colombia produced a story map on its SDG governance story. So again, it summarizes the main points, and the visualization tools with maps is very effective. The custodian agencies as well showcased some of their work. So the FAO produced a methodology of measuring 1542, which is Mountain Green Cover Index, in the format of a story map. And again, what the story map allows you to do is present the text, and again, with maps, you can click on the maps and get information on particular regions in the maps. So the capacity development in terms of promoting the SDG geospatial roadmap, we had the UNSD, the United Kingdom Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, and this looked at a project on SDG monitoring and supporting countries through conducting data gap assessments and assisting with national SDG frameworks. So through this work, the mission successfully promoted the implementation of SDG's geospatial roadmap with Kyrgyzstan's work. And here again, it showcases some of the work. The approach on using geospatial information to measure and monitor SDG 911, which was the proportion of the rural population who live within 2 kilometres of an all-season road, and also 1131, which is the ratio of land consumption rate to population growth rate. So again, this can be demonstrated in the format of an animated map where it shows the change in land use over time. So it's not just a map that's fixed in one particular time. You can showcase it over a period of years, months, or as I said, in the case of Ireland, we showed it in the land or the change in COVID by region in terms of weeks. So the workshop brought together GIS experts from the Statistics Office, the Kyrgyzstan land use, and various GIS experts. And the statisticians worked with the GIS experts because they did not have the geospatial analysis skills. So they effectively produced indicators for ratio of land consumption rate to population growth. And we also have a case study from Rwanda, and this brought together the National Institute for Statistics, the Land Management and Use Authority, and again, the geospatial experts worked to produce the SDG 241, which looked at the proportion of agricultural area under productive and sustainable agriculture, and also SDG 1542, which was mountain green cover. Now, my apologies because I don't seem to be changing the maps here. So if you look at the live version, and as Cara mentioned, the story map will be available on the web page. The wiki is it? Thanks, Tanya. So Burundi, the participants again from the geographical institutes and the statisticians came together, and they looked at forest area as a proportion of total land area. So this is SDG 1511. They also looked at the proportion of land that is degraded over total land area, and again the mountain green cover index, all under goal 15, which is life on land. So implementing the SDG Geospatial Roadmap will enable countries to better harness geospatial information. And as we know, implementing the SDGs cannot be achieved through statistics alone. So it emphasises the importance of cooperation with the mapping institutes and the various GIS experts. So it emphasises again the interconnected and interrelated nature of the SDGs. We collectively have the tools and mechanisms that will enable the production and dissemination of high quality, timely and reliable data within our grasp. But we need to work together and pool all the resources to realise the full potential of the data. The roadmap is the starting point to enable the IAEG-SDGs, custodian agencies and countries to fully harness geospatial information for the SDGs. This roadmap calls for geospatial and location-based information to be recognised and accepted as official data for the SDGs, along with the official statistics. The Working Group on Geospatial Information is now working on guidance to better enable disaggregation of SDG indicator data by geographic location. So as I said at the beginning, the focus is on place. Geography focuses on a sense of place, and that's what separates it from the other disciplines. The working group again welcomes support of the IAEG-SDGs and member states to implement and raise awareness of its work so that the ambition of the 2030 agenda can be fully realised through crossing the geospatial digital divide. And if you want further information, you can contact Mark Iliffe at the UN, and his contact details are at the bottom of the presentation on the website. And thanks again to Mark for supporting this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. The Geospatial Roadmap is an excellent tool to help countries incorporate geographic location and dig deeper to the geographical differences. So thank you very much for that. I'll call our second presenter up for this this session. So monitoring survey-based indicators with the SDG 16. Arvin Gadgil, UNDP Oslo Governance Center, on behalf of UNODC, OHCHR, and UNDP.
Good. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly a pleasure to be able to present this joint initiative to you. My name is Arvin. I am the director of UNDP Oslo Governance Center, and together with UNOCHR and UNODC, we have developed this survey instrument tool that I will just go through a little bit now to get you a sense of it. And really, my goal with this presentation is to pique your interest in it so that you can research it a little bit more and approach us for any questions that you may have. And let me just preface this presentation by also saying that SDG 16 as a set of goals, a set of targets, has gained a lot of interest across the world over the last few years. We sense it at the Oslo Governance Center. The interest is certainly increasing. There are many reasons for that, but I also do think that the statistics community needs to follow suit and try to respond to those requests for more and better data on peace, justice, and inclusive institutions. So it will be a bit quick, this, but please remember that we are here to also answer questions not only in this session but also beyond it. Next slide, this one, great. So the purpose of this slide is just to simply say that we are building the survey instrument on a lot of work that has been done before. So yes, there was a realization that there was a lack of methodology when it comes to measurement of SDG 16 indicators, but we also were very cognizant that we couldn't reinvent everything anew. We needed to build on what was already been done, a great work that had been done that was related to SDG 16 indicators. So, for example, the Manual on Corruption survey that provides guidance on the measurement of corruption was a building block. A human rights-based approach to data was a building block, and the Manual on Governance Statistics as well. And not least the regional standards such as the Victimization Survey for Latin America and the Strategy for Harmonization for Statistics in Africa. This is just my main message here is to say that this is a survey tool that is grounded in it's in a way standing on the shoulders of other methodological work that has been done before. In that way, it is a well-designed tool. Now, next slide. Just a quick snapshot of the process. As you can see from the slide, we had, of course, a desk review and a run-through of all the different instruments that were already existing, and then went on to these expert consultations in 16 countries, in 17 different consultations, and then, of course, the cognitive testing in Q3, Q4 2020. And we had 8 piloting countries in 21, and then the development of the full package towards the end of 21, and of course then the welcoming for the Statistical Commission in March this year. And all through this process, I just want to thank anyone and everyone who has been part of improving this tool and initiative, because we're quite confident that what we ended up with is a truly quality tool. Next, thank you. Now, a little bit about the survey instrument. The most important thing to convey about this is that it is a modular approach. There are new elements here, but there are also old elements that we're building on. There are 6 modules: access to justice, corruption, discrimination, governance, human trafficking, and violence. And each of these modules collects on one or more indicators. Some of them are more established, but some are also entirely new. So I guess the main point here is to convey that this is a modular survey approach, which means that there is this possibility for a lot of national adaptation, and you can put it also into other survey instruments that you have, try to integrate it into other waves of surveys that you are implementing. So in that way, it is a very agile tool. Next slide. This has to do with disaggregation. In the survey tool, we are concomitant with the IAEG's standards on minimum disaggregation. But this slide is just to show you that, well, it's impossible to see, isn't it? But it's to try to show you that each of the indicators have a minimum disaggregation requirement. But if the more of the survey that you implement, the more disaggregation you will have across the indicators. I mean, this is logical, of course, but I think it's worth saying. that, for example, if you look at education is not a minimum requirement for access to dispute resolution mechanisms, but it's important, of course. I mean, there are many there's evidence to suggest that there is a relationship between education and access to dispute resolution mechanisms. So therefore, looking at how these different modules can complement each other in bringing out disaggregations on other parts of the survey. And that's why, we're really encouraging countries to look at how to implement the survey in full, because then you get a much deeper disaggregation on all the different indicators. Okay, next slide. So, why measure now? I mean, I did mention a little bit at the beginning how this is becoming a critical conversation area, SDG 16 related targets. And I think, there has been some hesitation on going forward with this because it's seen complicated, or it's been lacking methodology. But I think we can establish now that there are three, main reasons for going ahead on SDG 16. One is, of course, that there is demand, and we recognize it from all over the world. And the other is that we now have a recognized methodology. So there are no methodological barriers to doing, quality measurement of SDG 16 targets. And there's also, I'm assuming, a broader recognition that the survey tools may not be perfect, but they are the best that we have at the moment. And given the time frame that we're given for the 2030 agenda, it is important that we now use the survey tools that are available and that are tested and tried and shown proof of concept. Now, I was just talking to our colleague, Mr. Maghrebi, here on this slide, because I wanted to show just an example of a country that has implemented the survey. And the important thing here is not the numbers or the results or the outcomes of the survey, but it is the way that Tunisia decided to design the process, which allowed for broad-based consultations with civil society and experts on very critical aspects of SDG 16. And it's this element of the survey which gives actually a value addition in terms of creating fertile ground for policymaking. Informed policymaking. So implementing the survey with let's call it a secondary motivation to create conversation on important issues is in the case of Tunisia, has shown to be of great value. And I'm sure Mr. Maghrebi himself will be happy to tell you all about it, because it is really an inspiring example of what Tunisia has done. And then the final slide, which is what now then? What can we do? So it's a questionnaire. The survey instrument itself is developed and it's ready. You can grab it and have a look at it. Then we have the implementation manual, which I looked at it now and I was thinking, why did we put exactly the same picture in front of both of them? Because they look the same, but they are different. There's a manual, and then there's the actual survey instrument and the questionnaire. But they go hand in hand, and they are important in that way, in that they explain they are complementary. But perhaps most importantly in this forum, just to underline that we as the three agencies are very eager to engage with those who are curious about the survey instrument and want to discuss it more. And we also have technical expertise that can assist with specific questions on implementation. So I guess that is my penultimate remark. Please don't hesitate in getting in touch with us on the survey initiative, and we'll be very happy to do what we can to get into a dialogue with you. And then just also say that there is interest from our side, UNDP side, to find ways of getting more countries to implement the survey. And we may actually also be able to provide some kind of assistance in doing so beyond the technical expertise. So if there is any defined and specific interest in doing this, please get in touch and we'll see if there is any particular, what should we call it, interlinking interests that can allow us to move quickly on implementation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Arvin. It's a great initiative, and I like that not only was a questionnaire developed in a modular approach, but also the implementation guide. I think that's really important to help countries be able to implement that. So thank you very much for that. We will open the floor now to questions or comments to either of our presenters. Malawi, please go ahead.
Thanks so much for the presentations made. My question goes to UNDP. I understand the first round of surveys like these ones, the GPS, it had a module on elections. I just wanted to find out why this time around, from the presentation you made, you did not include it. And if you removed it, why did you remove it? Because from what we have seen in most of the countries, African countries, most of the elections having attributed to violence and mistrust. So definitely we need more data on that one. That should guide in planning so that we can have better elections, and also it can also encourage participation by the electorates. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? We would take a couple of questions and then ask the presenter to respond. Tanisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not specialist of SDG 16, but I say despite the sensitive of this survey, our institute with the trusting of the institute, we can have several partners on the subject, and we made two waves, 2017 and 2021, on this survey, and the results are published in our seats. It's in Arabic. So, it's necessary for our all other national institute to do this survey and to do the gap in the other SDGs. Thank you.
Do you like to respond?
So the last one was more a comment than a question, I assume. Yes. To Malawi, I just want to, so the elections are not part of the SDG framework, as you know, so it's not part of this survey initiative. What other survey initiatives related to elections there are, I'm not fully aware here, but I'd be happy to engage after this.
Are there any other questions, comments for our presenters? Okay, I see none, so thank you very much to both of you. Okay, so we will move on to our third presentation in this session, Applications of Earth Observations to SDG Monitoring in Japan. Maki Akaraki, Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, if you could make your way up. And my apologies for the name pronunciation. I'm working on it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Arakaki Maki, Section Chief for International Statistical Affairs, Office of Director General for Policy Planning on Statistical Standard, and the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications of Japan. Today, I'd like to share our experience with the use of Earth observation for SDG monitoring. Let me start with a little bit of the background. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development highlights the importance of public-private cooperation to exploit the contribution to be made by a wide range of data, including Earth observation and geospatial information for SDG monitoring. Next slide, please. in 2080, based on the master plan concerning the development of official statistics, Japan launched the Industry Government Academia Partnership Meeting for promotion of the use of big data. It's a platform where experts from industry, the government, and academia gather to share best practices and solutions to various issues related to the use of big data and promote mutual utilization of the data among ministries, local government, private companies, etc. Please click. Thank you. First, the working group on validation of grid square moving population is established under it, and then please click. In 2020, the working group on validation of method of using observation data was launched to focus discussions on the development of new indicators besides official statistics. The working group promotes the use of observation data by analyzing the data, producing statistics, and validating the usefulness and accuracy of the result using relevant data. The group currently focuses on the validation of SDG indicators using Earth observations. The working group consists of experts from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, JAXA, as well as universities and relevant ministries. The Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications support the group as its expert, as its secretariat, of course. For your information, JAXA is one of the organizations which actively contributing to the SDG monitoring in the global level as well. They participate working group on geospatial information under IAEG-SDGs. In addition, JAXA's satellite-based global mangrove map is used by UNEP as an official data in order to monitor mangrove extent and changes for the indicator 6.6.1, change in the extent of water-related ecosystem over time. Next slide, please. The working group has so far conducted validation of 2 SDG indicators. One of them is indicator 11.3.1. The indicator measures the extent of urbanization, and it's defined as a ratio of land consumption rate to population growth rate. The use of satellite data is suggested in the metadata. UN Habitat calculate estimates for representative regions in each country for the indicator. But in order to confirm the validity of the estimate, to use them in the decision-making for policy and industrial measures, it was necessary to expand the calculation range of the estimate and to evaluate the reliability of the calculated value. For this purpose, the working group conducted trial calculations and validation of indicator 11.3.1 using data specific to Japan, including JAXA's satellite data. The detailed report is available on the website of the working group. Also, the results are disseminated on the Japan SDG Action Platform. Next slide, please. Oh, the one back, thank you. The other indicator is 15.4.2, Mountain Green Cover Index. The indicator was developed in order to assess the conservation of biodiversity by recognizing differences in vegetation according to mountain classification. JAXA verified the estimate calculated by the FAO based on the FAO's methodology using JAXA's high-resolution land use and land cover data, and the shuttle radar topography mission data. In addition, fundamental geospatial data produced by the Geospatial Information Authority of Japan was used to validate the relevance of the indicator. The detailed report is also available on the website of the working group, and the results are disseminated on the Japan SDG Action Platform. Next slide, please. Let me conclude my presentation by sharing the key recommendations from the report of the Industry Government Academia Partnership Meeting for promotion of the use of big data. Based on our experience, the keys to promoting the use of big data for policy makings are: 1, conducting experimental estimation using big data and share the result for validation and improve via feedback. 2, extending the use of big data, such as Earth observation, that are already used for some official statistics. 3, making use of outsiders' opinion, agile development, and needs-driven approach. 4, using the partnership to enhance collaboration between industry, government, and academia. We will continue to seek the release of new indicators using the platform of this partnership meeting. If you are interested in the details of the validation process and published result, please do visit our website. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much. This is a great example of an industry, academia, government partnership. So this is fantastic. I will now call up Denise Grummenberger from the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics to talk to us about the use of satellite imagery and air pollution stations for producing selected SDG data.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Denise Grunenberger. I'm the head of institutional relations in the presidency of IBGE, that is the National Statistical Office. And my presentation is a work in progress. We are exploring data sources and studying the different possibilities of data sources to construct the SDG indicators 391 and 1162. So suggestions are welcome. This figure shows the necessary articulation between national data producers. We have been producing the SDG 3 indicators in collaboration with Ministry of Health. The experts in Ministry of Health have a common project with the Brazilian Space Agency, INPE. This is named the CISAN project. So there are a whole coordination effort to put the IBGE in contact with INPE, which is bring the teams of the SDG 3 and SDG 11 closer to work together to produce the two indicators that has a common part, that is the information from particulate matter, PM 2.5. The next slide, we can see one of a challenge that we face to produce these indicators, because we have 27 agencies in Brazil that are responsible for monitoring environmental issues, one for each federation unit. And now we are contacting them with the aim to the host of meeting to discuss with them the indicator and the data sources from monitoring stations, mainly PM 2.5 and PM 10. The CISAM project, for example, doesn't use the information on the PM10 concentrations, and will be necessary this articulation with environmental management agencies. The next slide shows the CISAM. CISAM is a project in elaborated in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Pan American Health Organization. This series hosted on the platform relies on various satellite data series to generate PM 2.5 concentration estimates for all Brazilian municipalities from 2019, with an updated schedule for 2022. The next slide. The CISAM data sources the CISAM database is composed of variables obtained from satellite images and numerical analysis. And CISAM has a temporal series for PM 2.5 from 2000 to 2019, using different models in different periods of time. MERA-2 model from NASA, and the Copernicus, that is in European Earth Observation Program. And in this map, you can see the parts, the regions in Brazil that has more concentration from this pollutant because of the wildfires, or in big cities, the metropolitan regions located in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Next slide, please. And this in CISAM platform, we can download the concentration of PM 2.5 on a daily basis on each federation unit, and choose one or more cities or towns in each federation unit. The next slide, we can see the parts, the regions in Brazil, that is the deforestation arc in Amazon region, and the southeast in metropolitan regions, São Paulo and Rio, mainly. But the spatial resolution of 12.5 kilometers used in CISAM can be a limitation for cities with smaller extensions. Validation with data from air quality monitoring stations has not yet been carried out. But is the next step to this work. We have difficulty in using data from air quality monitoring stations for some large cities in the construction of the indicator, when in Brazil, for example, we have fires in rural areas which affect the health of the population, including those who live in cities, particularly in small and medium-sized ones. Showing this image, I highlight the problems of fire in some regions. And in Amazon region, we don't have monitoring stations. And the combination of two data sources maybe can be the best way to produce this indicator. Yeah, this image shows the distribution of monitoring stations for environmental data, namely the PM 2.5 concentrations. You can see the lack of ground-based monitoring networks across large regions of Brazil. importantly in the northern and Midwestern regions, which are disproportionately impacted by smoke from wildfires. Because of this, we have opted for a remotely sensed data series developed by the National Institute for Space Research. The next slide shows the monitoring stations that we can see again the concentration in the most large cities in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. We also have other data sources from air quality platform. That is an analysis tool created by IEMA Institute that gathers and standardizes air quality monitoring data generated by the government in Brazil. It facilitates air quality management by authorities and to bring information to society and scientific communities. The platform displays information station by station about what is being measured, where there is an air quality monitoring stations, which pollutants are monitored in each station, if there was representative monitoring in this station, and the evolution of pollution over time. The platform is a source of information for the WHO air quality database. Yeah, I showed you big challenges we are facing to produce this indicator. One of them is gather information from several sources, considering the part of the indicators that air quality stations and part the pollution. There are no monitoring stations for all Brazilian territory and a few observational data for validation. Data from air quality monitoring stations in different federation units are not comparable. The data series with national coverage is limited until the end of 2019. And in addition, and to finalize my explanation, I asked to WHO if it is possible, there is a need to make updated parameters available to countries to be used, such as integrated exposure response functions and the minimum exposure level to consider. It is important to countries to calculate using national data sources. Thank you. The next steps. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Freeze it. Yeah, the next steps, we will host a meeting with environmental management agencies and collect data from them, and we will get the data analysis, doing the linking data from satellite images and air quality monitoring stations, and produce the indicators and validate the indicators, following our common collaborative process that the next slide showed you. In general, we realized many meetings with national data producers, discussing the global methodology to produce this indicator. And this complex process related, for example, to the SDG 3 that has many indicators to produce. Next slide, I put the link to the Brazilian SDG platform that is the result of a collaborative effort of the national data producers coordinated by the IBGE. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Denise. It's the challenge of geospatial information and using it and kind of incorporating it with other data is real. And I really appreciate that you gave the concrete challenges because, you know, we talk about them theoretically and so it was nice to see those concrete challenges. So thank you for that. So we will open the floor for questions or comments. I see Mary from Ireland.
I would just like to compliment both speakers on excellent presentations, and they very successfully demonstrate the power of Earth observation data and GIS tools to develop SDG indicator data, which isn't available, and also the collaborative nature of your presentations in terms of bringing all the experts together from the various institutions. So well done to you both, and I look forward to reading more material. Thank you.
Yeah. We'll take a couple of questions if there are any. Okay, would you like to respond?
Yeah, the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics produce geospatial information, and we have been producing other indicators using Earth observations, but many other institutions no produce this information. For example, the agencies, the environmental management agencies in general don't use satellite images. They use the monitoring stations. Yeah, and in other situations, we have a partner who doesn't use Earth observations also. And we need to discuss a lot how we can put the global methodology in practice to produce the indicators. And I always share with these national data producers the information that I gather in these forums. It is important to share the methodologies, these presentations. This is a way to capacity other institutions. And in meetings, we share knowledge. But it is a challenge because we have a lack of human resources in number. In quality, no, we have good experts. But in quantity, yeah, we need more people to work with the construction of these indicators. Yeah.
Do we have any other further comments or questions for presenters? Oh, Malaysia.
Okay, I'm just wondering because I think using Earth Observatory is quite, you know, in terms of cost, is very high. How do you manage that?
I didn't understand.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Using Earth Observatory as a source of indicators for statistics, I mean, is very costly. Like for Malaysia, there's another agency that is in charge of the Earth Observatory. So we have to go through a lot of procedures and to also consider the cost if we were to use Earth Observatory. So for the case of Brazil, how do you approach this?
Yeah, the cost is another problem. We have information in CISAM project by INPE until 2019. And now they need financial resources to continue the project. if they don't get, we can't use this information. We hope they get these financial resources. And to have monitoring stations in all territory is not possible because Brazil is a big country, as Canada is. Everything is more complicated in a big country. And I think Canada doesn't have monitoring stations in all territory, no. Yeah, or do you have? No idea. No. Yeah, because in general, countries have monitoring stations in some places that are concentrations of pollutants, for example. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your comment and questions. First, I would like to respond to your congratulations, Mary. I would like to also extend our congratulations to your wonderful work of geospatial community. I understand all the technical support from your communication made us available from statistical offices or endeavor to explore new possibility of developing SDG indicators from country perspective. Also, I would like to thank you for the organizer of these wonderful opportunities and programs of this IAEG-SDG meeting. I think we learned new initiative from geospatial information side, like roadmap, geospatial roadmap. I think there are some, we also can use such a, how to say, already developed facilities or things in our country based on the information you provided in this conference. And here in Brazil's information, I understand we are facing similar problems in somehow. So I now know there are some experts we can consult when we face similar difficulties.
I can imagine.
Yes. And as for Malaysia's question about the expenses of using Earth observation, in case of Japan, we were so lucky to have excellent partner, JAXA. They took initiative for developing new indicators methodology in Japan. So they actively promote the use of their Earth observation. So we didn't need to consider about the cost. So I think that's a different situation we have back in Japan.
Thank you to our two presenters. Oh, Mary, please go ahead.
I would just like to emphasize, as you mentioned, the importance of sharing experiences because we have had similar issues with validating Earth observation data. And as a lot of people are familiar with the rain in Ireland, we have a lot of cloud cover, which can be difficult for satellite imagery. So I think it's quite good that we can get in touch and share the experiences. And I think the roadmap emphasizes that, the importance of collaboration and sharing the experiences of all countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of our presenters. I know you all think there's only one more presentation and you're going to get a long lunch, but that's not going to happen. Because we're going to move one of the presentations from this afternoon up because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't keep you here. We're going to have the next presentation is from the co-chair Karen Chavez Quintero from DANE in Colombia, Data Innovation in the Data for Now initiative.
Well, thank you. continue with this thing of sharing experiences and also taking the opportunity to close the Data for Now initiative in Colombia, I'm going now to present some of the recent, let's say, advances that we have had in this strategy. First of all, I'm going to briefly give you an update on what is the current approach of innovations in DANE. We have defined the experimental statistics line, and we have also characterized them as the ones derived from projects that have at least one of the following innovative aspects: new sources of information, the statistical methodology used, and or a new topic not previously measured. And also that there is something to highlight is that we count experimental statistics as official statistics in DANE. And why do we do that? Because we are very convinced that they help us to improve the availability of relevant and timely statistics with the required levels of disaggregation that often we don't have in the surveys. And this is quite relevant also in the framework of the 2030 Agenda for Leaving No One Behind, and with the differential and intersectional approaches. Second, to integrate traditional and non-traditional sources of information. We are not just thinking in replaces the traditional sources and methods. We want just to complement. And finally, generate capacities in the entity's staff to avoid continued dependence on external agents for innovations. And this is quite relevant, and why we do also invest in this, because we believe that there are scale economies in innovation. For example, if you use satellite imagery to calculate any of the SDGs from Goal 11, then after that you know how to process satellite imagery, you can use to compute to any other topic. And also we have a list of published experimental statistics. I'm not going to read all of them. I'm just going to mention that we have the methodology available in our website, so you can find there the link. And also I want to highlight that SDGs are leading this experimental statistics production. In terms of quality attributes and in the given the lack, let's say, of frameworks and standardized processes for these new methods and sources, our overall quality approach for these experimental statistics in DANE is that to take in consideration the 10 quality attributes of official statistics coming from the United Nations Quality Assurance Framework. And after discussions within the technical director and also the general director, we decided that 6 out of these 10 attributes of official statistics were not negotiable, let's say. So quality attributes as relevance, opportunity, accessibility, interpretability, coherence, and transparency also needs to be fulfilled by the experimental statistics. With this approach, we come up together some years ago in 2019, I guess, the first time. And we cross paths with the Data for Now strategy. That is an initiative that aims to increase the use of ROSE methods and tools that improve the timeliness, coverage, and quality of SDG data through collaboration and partnership, technical and capacity support, and information sharing. This strategy is led by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, the World Bank, and the Sustainable Development Solution Networks. In the specific case of Colombia, we have defined some thematic areas. I'm going briefly through all of those, and depending on time, I'm going to give a little bit more details. So first, we have the estimation of poverty measures at subnational levels. We usually produce data, but not for the whole country. We have, again, more than 1,000 municipalities in Colombia, and from surveys, we just have information on the 23 main cities there. So what we do was to estimate a first multidimensional poverty index using satellite imagery combined with neural networks. And with this exercise, we could have the MPI at per block level. And in Colombia, a block level is in average 2 kilometers of distance. Also, we have worked in monetary poverty estimates using a small area estimation techniques. Then we have for SDG 4, some interinstitutional work to establish key measures for public policy. And this is relevant because this work was done also with the Ministry of Education. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this before in the next slide, but then the work with civil society for SDG 16, and also related to the topic of the meeting next 2 weeks of having a citizen science and citizen data in the statistical production. We use social media data to calculate some proxy indicators of SDG 16, discrimination and political representativeness. And also we have in the last months started to develop an LGBTI+ registry. And finally, we have also trying to develop a digital tool to collect data from CIPSA, that is the acronym in Spanish for a system, price information system of the agricultural sector. And this is quite relevant for insecurity food measures. Next, please. Okay, well, so we're going now to describe briefly that we have published a statistical brief on measuring home-to-school accessibility and some analysis of results. We work again with the Ministry of Education to identify needs in measuring home-to-school accessibility and to look for the statistical relations at the beginning between the distances and the dropout rates of students. We have produced and published a document both in English and in Spanish, and it is also available in the link that I put that in the presentation. And we definitely characterize the impact of accessibility on a school dropout and attendance rate. Here, the specific support of the Data for Now initiative, and sorry, there is a mistake there. We have some consultants. The first bullet is not there, definitely. We have a consultant expert in data linking to merge data sets. In the case of education, we have a lot of sources of information in Colombia, and it's not only DANE, but also diverse entity, something like 10 entities collecting data about education. So all integration protocols were quite relevant. And a consultant expert in the IT infrastructure to interoperate the diverse data sources, and also a consultant that teach us how to measure distances in different ways using geospatial information. Next, please. About the process and results, we first did some calculations on distance metrics. We used 3 methods: Euclidean distance, the Manhattan distance, and the routing distance. We still have some coverage challenges because when integrating all the data, we still have some issues. In Colombia, we don't have unique IDs for people. So you have one ID until the age of 18, and then your ID changes. So that's give us additional challenge to merge some data, and also not all admin records have information on the ID number. The outputs were the median and mean of distances at municipality level, some color plate maps with the mean and medians, and the dropout rates by distance deciles. What we found is that there is a positive correlation between distance deciles and dropout rates. When disaggregating results in public and private schools, we found that differences in dropout rates between distance deciles were only relevant in public schools, with no significant differences for private schools. Next one, please. About the project of the LGBTI+ population, Well, there is a need to recognize that there is discrimination of some of these people still in our country. We have a broader approach of the differential and intersectional approach in DANE. We have produced a guide for the inclusion of the differential and intersectional in the statistic production of the national statistics system. And we have been mainly focused on disaggregations by gender. And this is the first time that we are going to do a statistical operation specifically directed for LGBT population. Next one, please. So what we do or are doing, first, we did a phase 1 of voluntary registry for the visibility of sexual and gender diversity in Colombia with the objective to compile a database for aggregated statistics and also to identify the number of LGBTQA plus people in Colombia. Here the data for now support was with a consultant expert in LGBTQI issues to mediate dialogues with different actors on the questionnaire for the identification of this population and things relevant as language and also the work with civil society that sometimes we, from the very technical side of statisticians, don't have. And after having a questionnaire agree with all the population, we are now ready to release a virtual survey, and we are going to develop a digital tool to collect the data. So in this case, the people is going to have access through a link to do all the survey. Next one, please. We again have done some calculation of proxy indicators of the SDG 16. Why proxy? Because we are using a specific social network based on the coverage and the number of users of this social media in Colombia. Facebook is the main social media used in Colombia, so that's why we use that. And the first case, we have the percentage of Facebook users by gender with comments that include discriminatory language. And for the 16.7.2, Facebook users with comments that include language related to make inclusive decision making. The data for now support here was a consultant expert in natural language processes methods, a consultant expert in social media data, a consultant also to manage and process all the data. We have highlighted that the usage of data from social media is quite feasible. However, still standardization protocols for collect and process all the data are needed. Natural language process models are useful, at least to gather complementary information for official statistics, and this kind of model also could be used in another projects. So strengthen the technical capacity in the staff in the National Statistics Office is needed. The methodology is already published in our experimental statistics website, and about the results, we are currently working with the presidential counselor to publish the result in a dashboard and to automate the process of web scraping the comments from the social media and automatically update the results in this dashboard. Next one, please. And finally, again, building a digital data collection tool for SIPSA, the system of prices and supply in the agricultural sector, that provides us with information on prices and supply that are directly related with food insecurity. And we have also seen in Colombia in the recent years an important increase in food insecurity. So this is an important topic also from the public policy side. So now this is an ongoing process that we have just started the work with one of the consultants. Also, SIPSA collection processes occurs in the morning, in 2 a.m. or 6 a.m. in supply centers. So there is no too many time to collect all data, and we have several mistakes when collecting that in a manual way. So we aim to improve the quality of the data collected by processing audios and images, and also we aim to automate the collection process for producing diary reports that we publish for this statistical operation. So that are the main results from the Data for Now initiative that is coming to an end to Colombia, but it's also an example on how can all countries use innovation. And also I understand that this strategy is widening to some more countries. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. A super interesting presentation. Interesting that experimental statistics are now considered official statistics. So, so that's very interesting. We would open the floor to questions from the audience for Karen. Oh, no, that's not what we're going to do. Sorry. No, I said we are going to move a presentation up. I was excited because I have questions, so I wanted to ask my questions. So we're going to move up the presentation that we moved down this morning. So Howie Chen from UNSD is going to talk about supporting SDG monitoring, the work of the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys.
Thank you, Chair. So I presented this presentation in the morning at 8 o'clock. I'm going to make it a lot shorter in this way, and many of you weren't there this morning. So today I'm going to talk about how our group, the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys, have been fulfilling our commitment to serve our countries. So a bit about what our group is and what has it done. And we also do surveys with our countries, a bit on the feedbacks from the countries and others in the community, and what's next. How do we improve our services to our countries? So our group was established in 2015 by the UN Stat Commission with 3 main objectives. One is to improve coordination, survey coordination at different levels, at national, regional, global level, and also advance innovative survey approach, including data integration of survey with our data sources. We've heard many about integration with non-traditional data sources. And the third one is enhanced communication advocacy. So we're really there to advocate for the importance of household surveys and also to advocate for a lot of great work that's been done in the community. So our group currently has 11 international agencies and 10 member states. The secretary sits with UN Stats Commission, the Statistical Division, and the co-chairs currently we have the World Bank and UN Women. So our group works through time-bound task forces on specific methodological topics, and usually led by members of our group, and also with contribution from members and also non-member experts. So we're very open on to contributions from others. So this is just a quick list of what we are really aiming to do. The role of the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. How do we want to support our countries? I'm not going to read them all, but one of the key aspects is our group is a group of many players. So we're really there, the secretary there is really to support and being an intermediary, a platform to make connections among countries, make connection between innovative approaches and our countries, and also really facilitate a lot of exchange of experiences. Next slide, please. So a quick run through of some of the work. We do a lot on survey coordination at the country level at this moment, mainly focus. We've been working with 5 countries and also Pacific community, trying to learn what are the challenges, what are great experiences our countries and the Pacific community have done great in coordinating survey activities in the region. So we are working on a series report for all 5 countries and SPC. They're coming out soon. And then we also, our group members have been working together. For example, in this particular case, we have ILO and the World Bank working together to test some of the instruments to make their survey more interoperable and coordinated. And we also facilitate conversations when there are different survey players who would like to work together. Of course, we did a lot during COVID. Survey was really, really hardly hit during COVID time. Almost all countries stopped their survey operations around the beginning of the COVID period. So we have a task force on COVID-19, and we've produced different outputs to support the survey operations, including how to carry a survey during COVID time, how do you wear a mask, and how do you planning trainings. And now the COVID is winding down, and a lot of countries have done quick high-frequency surveys using mobile phone or web. They ask how's the quality? Are they comparable to the face-to-face surveys we used to do? We were used to do pre-COVID. So we are coming out of a guidance to support countries to assess the quality of their surveys and also to adjust to reduce the biases. And we also maintain a COVID impact survey dashboard that has about 800 surveys from 180 countries, though most of surveys are supported by our members. So you'll be able to see all the detailed information of these surveys online, and other work in microdata dissemination, spatial anonymization, and we currently work on inclusive data collection, especially focusing on respondent-centered survey design that is led by UK ONS. And we are continuing to support our countries on SDG data disaggregation, including the collaboration with IAEG-SDGs on smart estimation and data integration. Next slide, please. Exchange of experiences, we do have a lot of webinars, and that really bring a lot of innovations into our community. And these are country practices, and we've heard a lot of great stuff. Like today, we've heard so many innovations. So we bring them into the community and share the experiences and the challenges, how the countries overcome the challenges. We try to be present in all major statistical conferences, events, to be present and also to get input from our countries and other communities, including the research communities. And we do respond to requests from member states, and then we connect countries with the experts. We do a lot of one-on-one email communication and then meetings really to try to see how we can support our countries. We maintain a country survey focal points list that's updated once a year, and then we communicate through that focal point list. And we also have a huge mailing list that we send out monthly newsletters. Now, just quickly, we did a survey last year to try to see how does our community feel about our work. So we have received responses from 67, and then they are sort of mostly NSOs, and the regional representation is pretty good. Next slide, please. So what the overall response from the survey shows that they're quite happy with our communication strategies. But then when we asked what topic they liked that we had brought into the discussion, so they said they wanted to hear more about guidance, or what they very they like the guidance and organize the webinars, and they like the sharing of latest development that help them to be on top of the new innovations, new methodologies. And our support, our work also help with networking and sharing experiences among countries themselves. They often connect with each other after the event, and they also pretty much appreciate the COVID-19 work we've done. So moving forward, they like to see more about availability of methodological work, training opportunities, and country practices, and of course the webinars and meetings and the work of Intersecretary Working Group. So during COVID, we see a lot of challenges that coming from countries, and so our group worked together on the position papers called Positioning Household Surveys for the next decade. So this paper really is a guiding paper for us to work together to support our countries post-COVID and see how we can make countries more prepared. There will be another pandemic coming or crisis coming. How do we make sure our countries are ready by that time, that they will not face the same challenges as before? Next slide, please. So the paper highlighted 8 technical priorities. I'm not going to read out here, but then 2 of them is really, one is data integration. How do we use surveys to make surveys more interoperable and support integration of survey with other data sources, including non-traditional data sources? How do we make sure our surveys are inclusive? Next slide, please. So this position paper will be used, it's actually endorsed by our group to guide our work for the next 10 years, decade. And then moving forward, we would like to extend our network with other communities, including different data source communities, right? Geospatial, we've heard a lot about CGD and main data, census and private sectors, and also the research community that we heard this morning from this morning's meeting. And we are establishing a technical advisory group to guide our work with experts, with the support from the experts. And we are going to work more closely with our regional partners, including the regional commissions, to really better support our countries in different regions. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Howie. I think it's an important group for sharing. So if you aren't a member, reach out to Howie. She likes emails at all times of the day and night. So, and she responds right away. So please reach out to Howie. We will open the floor to questions and comments either on Karen's or Howie's. Go ahead, Jordan.
My question is to Ms. Colombia concerning data. Concerning data for now, I think one of the conditions was to include the decision makers in this work. How you did that?
We'll stack up a few questions if there are other questions. Ireland?
I would just like to ask Karen if she has any statistics on the age cohort that are overrepresented on social media and what age cohort that isn't represented. Thank you.
Mary, can you repeat that?
Just in terms of social media data, like it's obvious that the younger age groups are overrepresented. So I'm just wondering, is it difficult to validate the data in terms of, you know, what groups are not represented, and have you statistics on the bias, and does it affect the outcome of your data? Thanks.
We'll take one more question and then we'll allow India.
Thank you. A question to her. What exactly, can you elaborate on the data integration part? What exactly you're doing for that group is doing? And then another thing, any recommendation regarding the testing the credibility of SA estimates through field testing?
Karen, do you want to start responding?
Okay, well, first question from Mohammed. How do we do this? Well, we have a policy document in Colombia for 2030 agenda. So DANE has the task to collect all the data, but at the same time, we have defined an entity that is responsible for every of the targets of the 2030 agenda that are part of this policy document. So our work is constantly with them. When we are working in measurements, we also involve to the entities that are responsible for the political progress of that targets. So we have this from this policy document released in 2018. And also we have a national strategy for the 2030 agenda with a high commission composed by diverse entities at ministry level. And we also have a technical committee for SDGs, not with ministry, but with the technical people. So we are regularly having meetings like once per month. So that's how we keep connected in terms of 2030 agenda, let's say the both sides, the measurement part and also the policy side.
What's their role in this work?
Our role, there are various, I would summarize, like first, we manage the database that is used to monitor the progress at national level. We have defined a national framework. Some of the SDGs are exactly the same that in the global framework, but we have some proxies and complementary indicators. We also have the task to fill data gaps, because when the national framework was established, there were also some policy goals defined as relevant from the policy side with no data. So we have also the task to fill those data gaps. And exactly in the same document, they say that we should work in at least one project of innovation with data sources for SDGs, because we also have at national level another policy document for big data that is led by the Ministry of IT. So we also try to connect all the policies, let's say. And what else? We have also the task of update the database every year, and also to teach the entities responsible for the report on how to do it in SDMX format, because we are not longer accepting information in Excel files and or through email, just by SDMX. And I think that those are our main tasks. An additional one, we have a national interinstitutional group with the United Nations system in Colombia. We have a lot of agencies in Colombia, like 15 agencies. So we have also the secretariat of this group to improve data availability in our country for SDGs. Next one was Mary's question on social media data. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why the results are not still published. We have just published the methodological part. We are currently analyzing the demographic coverage of these social media estimates. We also are trying to balance between the coverage of a survey and also the coverage of social media. So it's really likely in Colombia that you in a rural area have access to internet and you have a social media, but probably the chance that in your municipality, one of the surveys of DANE goes be in none. So it's also to balance not between the best option of surveys, because we also have challenges from surveys. And of course that, again, we are still doing this demographic analysis to identify and quantify the bias. And that's also why we are talking about proxy indicators, and we have changed the name of these proxy indicators because the original indicators are proportion of population, and we have changed the name to proportion of Facebook users with comments, blah, blah, blah. So we think that still is relevant to work with these data sources, doing all the precisions needed to be understood that are in a specific framework.
How do you get the data on the demographics of Facebook users? Is it made readily available by Facebook itself?
No, they don't want to give us the data. We have tried, but no. We are doing let's say two kinds of analysis. First, an analysis of images on people to estimate the age of the person and also to estimate the gender. And we have also designed an algorithm that, based on the Colombian names, is going to tell you if there is a probability of being a male or a female. So the demographic analysis is not going to have all the characteristics, let's say, but at least the basic characteristics.
Sorry, could I just make a final comment in terms of GDPR and data governance? Is that information governed by law, that you can use people's images and personal information, or do you have a regulation that covers it?
That's an excellent question, because we already have had a lot of discussions within the government about the use of this data. So the first thing to know is that we are using public comments in the network. No. However, we are being very aware of not publish the whole database. Also, there is a law that give us, as National Statistics Office, an exception to use data for the purpose to produce official statistics. But we need to still guarantee that first, the published data is not going to put someone in the for example, we are not going to publish that Karen Chavez is making a comment that in which she feels discriminated or underrepresented. We are going to publish just aggregates, and despite the comments are public, the whole database is still private. And finally, since there were some doubts at the initial stages in publishing these results, we released a public consultant on the methodology, another reason to publish first the methodology. So, and we have a process for an open consultancy of that methodology. So in case someone wants to demand us for using that data, we said, okay, we open this for a time frame that is defined by law in Colombia of 15 calendar days. So we made this process of open consultancy, and we didn't receive these kind of alerts and or comments, just like in case there is any risk still of being demanded for using this data.
First, let me respond to the data integration. So we don't have a task force yet. We're still doing the scoping exercise because it's huge. It's a huge field, and all of our members are doing something on data integration. So we would like to approach from two aspects. One is how do we make survey more interoperable to be ready for data integration. The other, how do we use survey to benchmark some of, especially the non-traditional data sources. So India is a member of our group. So if you would like to work with us to support the scoping exercise, or to lead the task force, let's talk. Smart estimation, benchmarking, and data validation. We have the wiki that, as Yongyi mentioned, smart estimation wiki page that has a lot of information how to do benchmarking, testing the estimates, the modeling and assumptions. And then we also advise, sharing all the experts advise that external validation is extremely important. Thank you.
Italy, did you have a comment, question?
Yes, thanks for all the contribution of all the participants that were very interesting for all the morning. But my point was exactly on the use of citizen data, and in the case of using these kinds of data like Facebook, because at least in Italy there are lots of problems related to confidentiality, and this could be a real problem. And I mean, the confidentiality in general with citizen data, at least in Italy, could be a problem, because I think I don't think we could do what you do, and we were immediately stopped by law from this in this case. And we in the National Statistical Institute we work a lot with the register and also with geographic data and so on, but we have to overcome a lot of checks from the privacy legal group that check everything and ask us to protect the personal data. So I mean, it is very, very important and very useful to share these experiences, because I'm very interested on, I mean, pro and adverse in this case, because everything is connected, of course. And I mean, I don't know if it is only in Italy that is so severe, but thank you so much.
OHCHR.
Thank you. I just wanted to congratulate the Data Initiative for Now, Colombia, and of course the Intersecretary Working Group on Household Surveys for the innovative work that they're doing to ensure that groups that are left behind or at risk of being left behind are included in surveys. So I think my question has been partly answered by Karen. It was
because I think you now with this work that you're doing with other countries as well, we can actually show that it's methodologically possible to collect data. So, for example, you talked about collecting data on gender identity, sexual orientation, and so I wanted to just hear a bit more what you have done, because usually the pushback is because of the political sensitivities of asking questions, and so I think you talked a bit about more the partnerships that you had, because I think it would be good for other countries who have also faced the same challenges, how they can push and collect more data on these population groups. Thank you.
I know there's another question there, but I'm going to get my questions in. Sorry. So I have two questions for you, Karen. The first one was when you were looking at the elements of quality for the experimental statistics, which are also official statistics, I was a little surprised that accuracy was not one of the components of quality. So if you could explain, particularly because they become official statistics, so that kind of blew my mind a little. So if you could explain on that. And the next one is related to Mary's comment. But my millennial children tell me that only old people use Facebook. So that if the primary social media platform is Facebook, is there an issue of what demographic is actually using it? So because according to my millennials, it's only old people who use it. So if you could just comment on those, and then after the response to this, we'll get the next round. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Going to the social media point, we want to highlight that both algorithms to web scrap the data and also the natural language processes are exactly the same if you use another social media. So we have also tried to do it with Twitter, that has no this limitation, this legal limitation, because now when you are using Twitter, you always are accepting the terms. So you are accepting that they could use your data. That's like a way to overcome. And the reason to don't do it in Colombia with Twitter is because we have a survey asking by the use of social media data. And from that survey, we have that currently in Colombia, most of people is using Facebook. Another thing is that these kind of questions on discrimination and representativeness are for people older than 18 years. So that was another reason to take into account that on social media. And I think that I have one more from you that you blow your mind. Not only you, we were aware of that when we were taking this decision, because this decision was almost 2 years back in Dani. So what also is happening and that we need to recognize from our perspective, for example, we are economists and we were publishing and taking decisions based in a lot of methods with no any aware of quality measure or quality processes, let's say. And this is not happening just in Colombia, it happens overall all around the world. So it's also a need to recognize that there is more data available that initially is not being collected with the statistical purposes, but is being used. So what are you gonna do? Because regardless if a statistics office use it or no, people is going to use that. So you need to start to open and to, let's say, build the bridge. And in terms of the specific comment on accuracy, yes, I know. It was also a lot of discussion over there in terms of accuracy. The thing is like it was also a balance again in not closing the door for innovation. What we do is always to check in the technical committee of the entity every statistical experimental statistic that is going to be published. And another thing to know is that it's not anyone who publish experimental statistics, it's just Danny. So despite we don't have a strict protocol to ensure accuracy, we do still do some research. For example, in the case of SDG 16, we have shared the experience in several scenarios with diverse people before publishing it. So, and still, again, recognize that there is a lack of standardized processes for new sources and new methods. And I think that we don't think that it's a good idea to just close the door because, again, outside the statistical world and for decision making, still people is using that.
Okay, I can't see the initials, sorry.
Danish Institute for Human Rights.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for that. And part of my question, Kara, you actually took it on the accuracy, and I wanted to talk about the quality criteria as well. And perhaps since that has been brilliantly addressed by Kara now, I would just have a second part of a question on this related to it's more of a curiosity and interest, appreciating what I find a very good practice of selecting, looking at those 10 principles and selecting some of them as, okay, these are non-negotiable, but we are open to then be a bit more flexible in some of the other criteria. So that's a really excellent practice. And I'm interested to hear, Karen, if, how was that reaction from the non-traditional data sources that Dani has worked so far, and how has that landed? I mean, has those 6 criteria, has it proven to be the right ones? Yeah, so it's more interested in hearing then from the practical experience of using those selected criteria there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sayonara. But first, I think that I missed a part of the question from Grace, and I've just realized. So I think that more than Colombia, because we are still in the process and we are basically copying the Norwegian model. We went in a mission to Norway. Actually, Mariana is not here. We were with her. Yeah. We were there, a group of people trying to learn from their Norwegians. And you talk about a point that is really relevant about the political manage that sometimes the collection of these kind of questions related to sexual orientation and gender orientation may have. So, for example, in that case, have a digital tool to collect data is an advantage because people could feel more comfortable in their homes or wherever they are answering the questions and not telling someone else about these kind of topics that sometimes are still traditional in our cultures. And then we have also seen that the people who is making the questions in person, they try to avoid these type of questions. So we are also having a bias in this in-person collection for the LGBTQ plus, I always, LGBTIQ plus population. But in the case of Colombia, just to know that we are just doing for LGBTI plus population. And then the question now of Sayonara. Well, in the practice, up to this point, we have been able to manage with these criteria. Actually, with the publish of these results, we have noted how important is also to advancing the innovations, and we have like push a little bit more in how many statistics are producing by this. I'm going to give an example. The MPI Again, it was the first time that we have MPI at per block level, 2 kilometers of distance, and did put to the public policy side a characterization of the differences in statistical terms that we already was seeing in the street, not only across cities, but in the cities. So, and everyone, after those results were published, our social media were like telling, everyone was commenting, asking for the results, etc., etc. So we have had a good experience, at least from the perspective of users, but that's also another reason to be a little bit more aware every time that we publish a new one, because it's not an automatic process that you fulfill the criteria and then you upload the data. No, it's always going to pass through the technical committee to check one by one the cases, because you never know.
Thank you to Karen and Howie for this. So this will end this session. So you do have an extra 15 minutes for lunch. So thank you very much. This is a really interesting session. And as I am not chairing this afternoon and I'm using this gavel, so it's lunch. And we'll be back at 2 p.m., please.